Today, you're going to learn how to actually build real confidence and the secrets that I haven't heard shared anywhere else in the world that comes from 20 years of transformational work that I've done with myself and with teaching others. And I've been a monk for 8 years or so. Now, I learned this through a very long, arduous process over the last 15 years or 20 years of unfulfilling relationships, pain within myself, and essentially results in my life like professional results that were just very unsatisfying. So I'm going to encapsulate everything that I've learned in addition to being on a spiritual path for many years and being a practicing monk that are going to have you unlock how to be actually more confident in your life. Now, here's the thing. We can only have the depth of relationship with someone else that we have with ourselves. So all of this hinges upon having a certain level of relationship with ourselves. If you want to learn how to be confident in the world, that will just kind of like get you a good job or get you a good public speaking gig for once every while. You can do things like power poses, that whole thing, and that thing that came out a few years ago. You can go to a Tony Robbins workshop. He has fantastic ways of having people feel more confident and get out there. But these kind of secrets that I'm going to share with you are ways that I haven't heard people really talk about around what my definition of confidence is really about. I'm talking about a wholehearted confidence where we share who we actually are as people by hiding nothing, and that has us become more and more unshakable in our lives. So let's get to it. The first secret is knowing your weaknesses. Now, I think a lot of you probably have a good sense of your weaknesses, but the thing that we need to do with those is to share them with others, with the appropriate people, and to work to improve them. It's one thing to know our weaknesses. It's another thing to actively engage in optimizing them and improving them. And it's another thing to share them in a tender, vulnerable way without bragging about them. I know plenty of people who would meet this first criteria of confidence by knowing their weaknesses, but brag about them and somehow still retain a level of arrogance that is really a protection for their own vulnerability because they don't... I know plenty of people who walk around the world bragging about their weaknesses, but it's still an expression of arrogance. It doesn't have, it's that fake, flimsy veneer of confidence that isn't real confidence because they might know their weaknesses, but they're not really improving them. There's the way that they're sharing them with others doesn't have any degree of vulnerability to it. So you want to become familiar with your weaknesses or your insecurities in a way that you're working to improve them and you're vulnerable in terms of how you share them with other people. Secondly, you want to practice humility. What does that mean? Well, the first time that I remember seeing this in action with someone who was actually very confident in my eyes was this fantastic therapist that I trained with probably 15 years ago now. She was amazing and exceptional at what she did. And she was sharing about her being a therapist, and she said these two words, I'm a pretty competent therapist. And I was like, you're way more than confident, I thought to myself. But there were two reasons why she talked about herself like that. One was that she saw herself on a continuous path of self-improvement, both professionally and personally. So even with her, she authentically believed and knew that she was just sort of competent and not exceptional, because exceptional would mean she was at a certain level that she hadn't reached for herself yet. Even in the general public of psychology and psychotherapy, she's probably one of the top therapists I'd ever seen or worked with at that point in my life. Right? And the other reason that she talked about just being competent was that she was also on a personal growth path, right? And that she not only professionally, but personally knew that she could improve herself. And secondly, she had a certain standard for herself around what exceptional quality, exceptional practice meant for her as a psychologist and as a psychotherapist. And she hadn't reached that for herself. So it just had me appreciate them. And I got to tell you, if you want better relationships, if you want to be closer to people, if you want better results in your life, if you can practice humility, and I don't mean false humility, like bringing yourself down off of your pedestal, not bragging about things, but also not going the other way and making yourself meek and downplaying everything that you do, but finding that sweet spot of the things that you are excellent at or exceptional at that you simply say you might be confident at because you relate to yourself as someone who's always improving themselves and hasn't reached a certain definitive goal about being the best, then you'll have such better results in your life and better relationships. I was a high performance rock climber for many years, and so I hung out with a lot of high performing super athletes in terms of the world of rock climbing, the best in the world. I hung out with and climbed with some of them, and I've got to tell you, the best climbers were also the most humble. You look at some of these guys like Chris Sharma and Adam Andra out there right now, you can kind of do a little YouTube search on them. They're fantastic at what they do. They have a degree of humility because they've been around practicing enough. And one of the things is that they've been beaten enough by other people in competitions or been outclimbed in certain ways that they have a certain wholeness to them, a certain maturity to them that's really neat to see. And I also saw the other side of these high-performance rock climbers that were super arrogant, that were, confident by any stretch of, again, the mainstream distinctions of them or assessment of them. But God, were they D-bags, Like, come on. They were so unpleasant to be around. And honestly, a lot of them got hurt or died in the world of rock climbing because they didn't have a degree of humility with the rock and with the nature and with their pursuit, which I think actually happens in a lot of sports with people. So, number 1, know your weaknesses. Number 2, practice humility. And number 3, practice vulnerability. Years ago when I was practicing public speaking, I have a degree in mathematics, and I was doing a talk on a certain, string theory I think I was presenting on back in my end of my undergraduate career. And I remember hearing that old adage that if you want to feel more comfortable talking in front of people, see the audience naked. And I remembered that a few years ago when I was giving a spiritual teaching workshop, meditation. And I was like, this is gross. I mean, I wasn't a monk then, so there's that level of just like not really wanting to see people naked. But it's also a total violation to picture people naked. I mean, who does that? And why is that still a thing? And so that besides those 2 giant reasons not to do this, the third one is that it's a total avoidance of our own insecurity. It just makes them vulnerable so that we can feel more confident about ourselves. I mean, how twisted is that, right? So if you really want to be confident in a genuine way, practice being vulnerable yourself in the right situations and with the right people. And what I mean by that is, you might not share your soul or the depths of your childhood trauma with a random audience that you're talking to, at the church dinner or something, it may not be quite appropriate, but find your way to weave in vulnerability to your relationships. Like in my work relationships, I'll find a way to be vulnerable. That makes sense. With my clients, as a psychologist, psychotherapist, I will find my way to be vulnerable, and man, does it make a difference in terms of our connection and my effectiveness as a therapist with my clients. In all the roles that I have, I do my best to weave in my own way of being vulnerable, and I can tell you that my relationships are deeply fulfilling. Actually, every one that I have that I can think of is deeply fulfilling, and it's not all because of me, because of what I do. It's a lot about them and the people that I choose, for sure. And because I've made this a practice of being vulnerable, practicing being vulnerable, and I'm not great at it because there are certainly times when I can be defensive and arrogant, all those things, major caveat, is that when I practice being vulnerable in my relationships, it makes a huge difference for other people feeling comfortable around me. And therefore, I feel fulfilled by their vulnerability. It becomes a beautiful cycle. So practice being vulnerable with the right people in the right situations. All right? You got this, and confidence is making its way to you. All my best.